everyone.
I want to welcome everybody again. This is our 11th Lege and Learn, and we are really enjoying these conversations as we march towards 2021 session, which will be one like no other. A reminder that we use the hashtag TXLEGE for all conversations and to follow that regularly so that you can stay engaged in the conversations for session. I also want to do a reminder that we have our next Lege and Learn will be this Thursday, November 12th at 2 p.m. with Representative John Rainey, also a member of the House Transportation Committee. And then next Tuesday at 9 a.m. we have Representative and former Judge Ben Lamont, also a member of the House Transportation Committee. So please continue to join us for these great conversations. I want to thank our series sponsors, Costello Engineering, Outreach Strategists, the Lens Group, Half Associates, LAN, LJA Engineering, and Memorial Hermann Hospital System. We really appreciate your support for these discussions. I want to invite everybody to ask questions using the chat box. During the program, you can message me directly with your full name, your affiliation, and if you want to ask your question or if you'd like me to ask it for you. And again, please send them throughout the program. Today, we are so honored to have Representative Jim Murphy. He has been a long friend and supporter of TAG from our creation, has always been a great sounding board for us, and we've always appreciated his partnership and his support. He is in his 6th term serving in the House and in his 3rd consecutive term as committee chairman for the House Committee on Pensions, Investments, and Financial Services, and is also a member of the Ways and Means Committee. But you know, we can read the bio, and we can talk about all of the awards and accolades, but I think we all know that Representative Murphy is somebody that you could just go have a lunch with, and you know that you would be getting great advice and great wisdom and really a balanced approach. And so we appreciate that, and we look forward to today's discussion. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Representative Jim Murphy.
Well, thank you, Andrea, and just say hello to all the people that are out there. I've got a chance to visit with Jack just momentarily. And hopefully we'll have some opportunity through the question period to also go through kind of whatever is of interest to you as individuals or as part of the larger transportation world. So as Andrea mentioned, we've just come through the election season. I'm now guaranteed, Andrea, a 7th term. Provided there's no recounts or problems with various precincts in my district, I think we're going to be okay. But that's one of the first things I would start with as sort of, you know, we set the table for what the session's going to be about. And I'm going to talk for a few minutes about that and then address some questions. And I saw Andrea, they'll probably give you all the hard questions that you'll have to ask them, but you'll do fine. And kudos to you guys for what you've done for transportation, because it needs attention. It's one of those issues that Stephen Covey talks about. It's important, but it's hardly ever urgent. You know, it's going to take this many years to do something. So it's very easy to say, yeah, why don't y'all wait a cycle or two and we'll get to you later on. And then we end up with like California, which, man, oh man, you think Houston or Texas has traffic issues, spend some time in LA. I don't know if they're ever going to dig out from underneath that lack of investment for many, many years. And so we've been better about that in Texas. So anyway, looking into the session, you know, the last election cycle, we're just kind of still all in recovery mode from that, was a brutal election cycle. It was like no other. And, I was blessed in my race not to have been targeted as some of my colleagues were, but we saw the volume of dollars flowing into these races, mostly from outside Texas. I mean, like 80% outside Texas, so not a little bit, where we had races. Craig Goldman, for instance, spent nearly $2 million on his House race, as did his unsuccessful opponent. And they had, I think there were over 20 House races where each candidate, both sides, R&D, spent over $1 million a piece. And it wasn't that long ago that $1 million race was considered just extraordinary. And now I'm telling you, we had 20 where both sides spent that kind of money. So it shows the heightened national attention, both on Texas as a swing state and the importance of what the legislature is doing, particularly regards to redistricting and what we'll do this next session. But the consequence of that is some of our members had their colleagues knocking doors to help their opponent, making calls, sending in dollars. And there's sort of an unwritten code in the Texas House that I don't campaign against my colleague. I might, let some other group do that, but I won't personally be involved. There won't be any fingerprints on it. And that was blown away this session. And I don't mean to pick sides, but largely with the Democrats. Y'all may not know, one of the things that in my bio, I serve as vice chairman for the Republican caucus in the House. And so one of my jobs the past year was trying to make sure that our candidates were supported and were working, were doing well. And so I was hearing this all the time about the odds our people faced, which were just, as I say, unlike ever before. And it's hard to raise $500,000, much less $1 million for a campaign. And so all of our people were just scrambling for particularly last 6 months, largely about fundraising, trying to do that. And so when you finally get out from underneath that, it's a hard adjustment to make. We go from campaigning to governing, and that's going to happen here over the next couple of months. So in 2 months, mark the days, in 2 months, we are in session. It'll build up gradually, but in 2 months, we're back in. And those feelings are going to be part of the context in which we work this next session. And I think there'll be a significant element for us to deal with. The next item, looking towards the session, is it looks like the change in leadership is being resolved in a pretty bipartisan, pretty peaceful way, in the sense of Dade Phelan, who's out of Beaumont, has amassed the support to be our next speaker. And, that's always a hard job. That's always a big job, right? Given this session, we'll talk about some of the constraints of the session. It's going to be particularly hard. And so it's good to have him in that role. And the election's not done. It's not certain, and it won't be certain until it is. But to be able to maybe get his leadership team established and to start to build a network. I mean, you go from, you're elected, and then and like at that moment you're in charge. So it's pretty daunting. So it's good that we've got a couple months of a ramp up for Dade Phelan in that respect, and I think he'll be a very, very capable speaker, and will steer us through some pretty challenging issues ahead. I'm kind of rambling a bit, Andrea, but I do want to talk about sort of what we're going to see this next session, and we'll start with the budget. We'll talk about transportation here in just a moment, but the only bill they say we have to pass, of course, is the budget. And we'll pass the budget. This year, it'll start in the Senate. So it'll be a Senate bill this year. Last year was a House bill. Our last session, it was a House bill. And we're going to see diminished revenues for the state of Texas. Everyone's kind of crystal balling, and we'll find out from the comptroller in about a month what they think the biennial revenue estimate is. We all call it the BRE, and it's our touchstone. Unlike your business members, Andrea, we find out how much money we're going to have before we get it, and then we decide how to spend it. So, and if it's not enough, we can talk about things like tax increases or fee increases, which, by the way, I think are very, very unlikely. And here's why. So the situation we're in, largely COVID inspired problems, is temporary. It's going to go away. It's going to be resolved. In fact, you may be aware, right? So Pfizer has a very promising vaccine they're talking about. The stock market's responding quite well. If that comes about, and it'll be months until we see it. I mean, that's a giant production issue, giant logistical nightmare of distribution, big political issue about who gets it and who's next and who's last. And I'm glad I don't have to do that. But that is going to be, I think, helping people understand that it might be a year, it might be 2, it might be 3 years until we sort of get back to where we were. But we don't need to do drastic changes to get through the next couple of years. We do need to do what a family would do. We need some belt tightening. We need forestalling some expenses. We're going to be dealing with, depending who you talk to, 6, 8, maybe $10 billion less over the next budget. And 10 billion, and that's more than my honorarium for this speech, but 10 billion is a lot of money. But it's about 4% of our budget. So, what family could make it on 96% of the money? Now, look, I think Texas is very efficient. I think any dollar we cut is going to leave a mark. It's going to cause some impact. We're going to have to be very careful about it. One thing I have said, and many others have said as well, is we want to make sure that we're holding the line on school funding, making sure the schools get the money that we gave last session so that we can continue to keep downward pressure on local taxes and give schools adequate resources to educate our kids. If you want economic development, educate your workforce and you'll be fine. And I think we took huge steps last session with the money and with the reforms in HB3 and in SB2 and the budget. So I'm feeling like that's going to be sort of a carve out now. So you say, well, it's 4%, but let's take out that 10%, 20% of the budget to work with. Now we're having to cut 4% on 75%. So the math gets a little more challenging. But I think that's going to be the direction for the state, is to say, can we economize and kind of get through this budget and watch things recover? It's really hard. I mean, Glenn Hager, who does a great job as our controller, has a really hard job. He has to, in December, okay, get this. So in December, he has to project that starting the following September, so 9 months later, what our income is going to be for the next 2 years. So he has to project out the state's income over 2.5 years away. So they're always going to err on the part of caution and to make sure that we absolutely have that amount of dollars, because, once we adjourn, and we're citizen legislators, once we adjourn and the budget's adopted, there's no makeup. There's no, sorry, I got a call coming in. Say back. There's no time to make up any budgets or revenues. It's just sort of what we said. So we will be extra cautious in terms of spending money next session. So that's kind of something to bear in mind. I don't know what to expect next session in terms of where we're going to be. Andrew, you've got my cell phone number. Jack does. If you don't have it, y'all are going to need it. I don't know if you're going to get to come to the Capitol. I don't know that we're going to allow the public to come in. Right. We may let the public in with appointments. And if you have an appointment, you can come to someone's office. But the notion of, dragging a bunch of, hardworking contractors and engineers around the Capitol and pop it into an office and saying hello or watching a committee hearing other than on TV, I don't think is going to happen. All right. And then, of course, the vaccine issue and who gets it, when do we get it? Right. But I think it's going to be a real challenge for us. So now this is just Jim Murphy's thoughts, and I'm not in charge of any of this stuff, but, if we are wearing masks, we can be within that 6 foot socially distant world. And so I'm hoping we can do our work on the House floor. But they're having conversations about us not doing work in the House chamber and maybe going to the convention center where we could be socially distant. Right. But when you think about having to import the video and having to bring in the audio and voting and all that, it becomes really difficult. And, even at its best, the legislative session kind of has some twists and turns, and this really complicated. But so Charlie Guerin, and he's fantastic, our chair of House Administration. Right. I mean, he's meeting with doctors and he's talking to the audio guys and the security guys and the data breach guys, trying to figure out, how is our best path forward going to be carried out, and when can we all know what's going on? So we'll see. But I'm hoping we're in the House chamber. The Senate, because there's so few of them and the chamber's the same size, they can operate in the Capitol. Well, if they're if they are there, then it makes sense to have us there because we have so much, back and forth. And so if people come to testify on bills, all that, I'm hoping we can do it. The bill testifying thing, that's going to be interesting. So we may allow a witness in the room to testify to the committee because you get so much more right live as opposed to as we're doing now on video. But everybody else thinks they have to be off in another room. There are only certain rooms that have enough spacing and video capacity that we can accommodate that. So it may be that the Transportation Committee has the room from 3 p.m. till 6 p.m. and that's it. You can't have this go on for 6 or 8 hours and 100 people want to come and talk about bikeways. That's just not going to happen. So they're going to end up scheduling things, limiting public input, which, public input's always made us better. It's always made us honest. It's always made us more engaged and knowledgeable. And those are good things and a little more random. But I just, I don't think that's going to happen. Certainly not going to happen like it has in the past. Right. Maybe on a very, very limited basis. So I know you guys want to talk about transportation money. I'll just say things have changed a lot. And I give y'all credit. The 2 constitutional amendments we've put through to take the severance tax dollars, the portion of them, and the sales tax on cars and dedicate those to transportation has kind of taken you out of this budget slashing fray because it's, we can't really get at that money, which is good for you. Right. And so I think you can be comfortable that the bulk of state revenues are going to be available to transportation. Discretionary revenue, much less likely. I mean, we're going to be cutting, we're going to be forestalling. If things need to get delayed or can be delayed, that's going to be talked about. If we can get some relief that way, it's going to be greatly considered. I mean, TxDOT, you're spending billions of dollars every year. If you can, move that money into the next fiscal year, it'll really take some pressure off the state. And I think we'll make it back up eventually, but that'll be largely a TxDOT driven conversation. And then I'll just mention one of the other things I'm following on pensions, investment, and financial services, which is my current committee. And, we all serve at the speaker's chairman. So we don't know what he's going to want to do next session, but we're looking really hard at TRS Cares, the teacher retirement system, their healthcare component. I mean, your business people understand if you're buying health insurance, medical inflation is just off the chart. We have teachers that are on TRS Cares for 20 years, and so it's just a growing part of the budget. And so we've got to find some ways to economize and provide teachers that kind of benefit. We did some great changes last session to make sure that TRS, the retirement, the pension system, remained solvent, and we're able to keep the promise we made in terms of teachers getting a retirement. Now we need to look at the healthcare, which, in some cases, the healthcare cost is greater than the pension cost, particularly if they're a long-term retiree. It's a fixed benefit program. So we locked that in X years ago, but healthcare just keeps on ginning up. And so we'll be looking at some changes there. We have a little entity in the States called the Pension Review Board. And they look at pension plans and how sound they are and what their plan is to get to, financial solvency. And we're talking about what we can do to help prop them up. The last couple of years for pensions have not been kind in terms of returns. And there's not been a whole lot of discipline practiced in terms of moderating the benefits in light of those returns. And so we sort of have people kind of whistling past the graveyard on this issue. And so how do we bring some fiscal discipline to this so that you aren't faced with, a slash in benefits or a spike in cost, that you kind of ease into these things. And so we're talking about what we might do with PRB to make them a little more engaged in the process and to have our plans be a little more circumspect. So some years ago, I got a report that talked about how most of the plans in Texas were financially sound. Well, that's a good report. But then you read the number of beneficiaries in the different plans and you realize most Texas retirees from the public world are in a pension plan that is unsound in terms of number of people, not number of plans, but number of people. Right. And so that's of great concern to me because those are our constituents. And in a teacher's case, for instance, they don't have Social Security benefits to offset or to prop up or to get inflation adjustments on for their TRS funds. So those are some things I'm following. So that's kind of my view from the bridge, if you will.
Okay.
And I'm happy to address any questions you might have. I hear about complaints. It's important that we are responsive. And I think we saw an incredible mandate this past election cycle where we were trying to hold on to 4 open seats as Republicans, and we went 4 for 4. And in spite of this onslaught of dollars, we lost 1 incumbent, we gained 1 challenger, we're at net 0. So this notion of turn Texas blue or flip the House or pick up congressional seats turned out to be untrue. And it's only because our candidates worked really hard and had a good message, had something to tell the voters about, that we're taking care of education, that we're planning for the future, we're growing the economy. These are things we really did. And people said, yeah, that's what I want. And so that's kind of the background as we head into the next session. So,
well, thank you for that overview. It doesn't sound busy at all. So.
Yeah. Piece of cake.
Yeah. Appreciate you kind of giving some context on what things are going to look like, or perhaps what things might look like for the session. And we're going to come back to that in a little bit, but I'm going to let our chairman, Mustafa Tamiz, I know he wanted to ask a question to kind of kick off. So.
Great.
Good to see you, Jim.
Hello, Mustafa.
Thank you for your leadership on so many different efforts in and around Harris County, but also in Austin now. So I wanted to get back to a thing that you said, which I think is really important, that there's going to be some kind of budget tightening, right? And when you look at TxDOT and some other agencies, there may be a sense to move things into future year rather than get rid of a project to basically manage cash flow, right? And those decisions are on the table. In our circle, we've talked about this a lot with legislators, and we just wanted to put this also with you. For every dollar that's invested in transportation, there's anywhere from $3 to $6 in economic activity. And that is an important fact that as you make decisions, as others make decisions, that they think through that element, because the biggest thing we're going to need coming out of this legislative session, as you point out, right, is some economic activity, right? We've taken a hit. This is not going to go away overnight. We potentially have a year, maybe a little bit longer. And what will protect jobs and our economy is an investment in the economy itself, right? And so there'll be some federal dollars hopefully coming in for infrastructure. We've been waiting for that for a long time, but potentially that's going to get locked out. But if the state tries to manage cash flow, right, or tries to say, I don't want to cut, I just want to reprioritize, that can slow down our economy too. So agree on education that we should not take a step back on education, but also on transportation, whether it's cutting out the fund or pushing the projects later, have an impact on the growth of our economy. So with that, thank you. I'd love to hear your thoughts about it.
Well, I think that's a great point to make. And of course, so often when we have a stimulus plan in place, they target transportation as one of the elements, and infrastructure in general as things to do to help prop up the economy and keep people working. And then it has a nice impact downstream. So no, it's a great point, and certainly something that I'll bear in mind and will encourage others to do so. But what you're doing now, talking to me about it, and just you need to replicate that times 149, or I guess 138 if you already had 11 of these things. But I think that's an important point, Mustafa. And the other thing to bear in mind is sometimes pushing things off into the future comes so at a higher cost. And whether it's inflation or the cost of delay, COVID's given us a great chance to catch up on things. And I know I'm talking to people at the Port of Houston, trying to get federal dollars in for some of the things that they're talking about doing there, which would be fantastic for the local economy and also a benefit for transportation. But I was going to say that, so we need to see these opportunities when demands decrease to do it. I mean, TxDOT I'm looking at it, TxDOT just finished a project up on Westheimer, repaving work ahead of schedule because the COVID traffic was so low. They're able to, minimize, their, traffic management plan and to get things done ahead of schedule. So we need to bear those things in mind. So I'll just say that's a great point about the effect of those dollars being spent. all dollars aren't equal. And we'll be counting on you guys to continue that advocacy. So great point. Thank you.
Thank you. And you and I can appreciate Westheimer more than other people can, right?
We can. Where's real quick, Mustafa? Where's your son right now? Your smart son that did some work with us.
He is he's very fortunate. He's a Fulbright scholar, so he's in London right now, and then he comes back in August to start law school in Yale.
Glad to see he takes after your wife.
Yes, he does.
He was like, and I'm going to set this up, and then I'm going to do the punchline. That was good.
Yeah, it's how we work.
Thank you, Mustafa. So touched on this a little bit. Local control was a huge issue last session. It always is, right? It's gonna come back in many different forms this coming session. Jack Drake, of course, has a lot of questions, so I'm going to read this one for him, but he'll have more, I'm sure. But really looking at whether or not you think the temperature and the tone is ready to have another conversation about local control, giving localities the ability to, if necessary, tax themselves, without just state enabling legislation, not a mandate, but loosening some of those restrictions because, we're all trying to figure out how to increase our economic kind of power locally and take some of that burden off of the state and the federal entities. So just thoughts on that as we're going towards the session.
Yeah, last session. So, to the legislators, last session was like yesterday. And so you say, oh, let's have another conversation about local control. I think, didn't we just talk about that yesterday? And so some of that, I know it's been a year plus, Andrea, but for us, we've not met since then. I know people said, why didn't you do something about COVID? And, as the legislature, and the answer was it didn't exist. We haven't been there since. So there's been no opportunity to do any of that. So when we talk about like transportation districts or local sales tax kind of stuff, the legislature, particularly on the House side, has become more conservative now than it was 2 years ago or 4 years ago. So I think if such a measure were coupled with a local vote, that the state would, enable it, and then subject to some sort of local election, that might be a path forward. I don't think you're going to see anything mandated or created absent that.
Right.
And I don't know if something like that would even be considered in the Senate or signed by the governor. I mean, more layers of government and more taxes on homeowners are not big winners in this time and age, and particularly given the fact that we're still kind of struggling as the economy. And I know the idea is, well, this will help the economy grow,
right? But
generally taxes are seen as a negative in terms of economic growth, even for a noble purpose like transportation.
Right.
So I think it's a tough sell, but I would also say I would want you to advance that conversation,
right?
Get something filed and sort of see what people say. And we didn't talk about this, but I would completely oppose any measures to say we're going to limit the number of bills somebody can file, the number of bills we're going to pass, or whatever that is. That's right. Very undemocratic in my mind. The good ideas will prevail. The good members will get their stuff done, and the others not so much. But there will be fewer bills passed, just given the logistics, the time frame, and the mindset of the members. So I think those are all challenges, but sometimes things need to be talked about for a session before they become law in a session. So I would start down that path. I would recommend you start down that path this coming session, even if it's not to totally put it across the goal line, but to have it start getting defined and finding out what your path forward might be. Right.
And so, there were a couple of questions that were in that same category. So Barry Goodman with Goodman Corporation also, kind of following up to that, if it's specified that there is a county vote, right, that it's not a mandate, but it's enabling legislation for a county or a municipality, two things. One, for vehicle registration fee. Some counties have said, we think it would be easier to do a gas tax, a local gas tax to fund a mobility plan, right? Something very specific. And then more recently too, we've been, conversations about just exempting, transit to be able to expand their tax base and to be able to do that. And so something very specific and targeted that is, again, voted on locally. That's such a key component of it. So I think that helps the conversation. I think it's still a tough sell, like you said, but I know that there's been other localities that have really gone after this, and some have had success.
Well, let me tell you something that's going to make it really, really hard. And that's what we saw here in Harris County. Transportation dollars allocated to another purpose from the toll users.
Right.
I got to tell you, if I'm a legislator from Harris County, and I am, and I'm trying to get things done for this community, right. That little antic down there at Commissioner's Court is going to be a factor in all those conversations, and not a positive one. So, right. Those are the things that make people look at legislation and say, what should we do to prevent that or to reverse that? Because I think one of the greatest things Harris County ever did was develop a toll road system. I mean, it's the best in the state. It's the strongest in the state. And it's a great asset for our community. But I just say that because when you get these conversations, they get pretty political beyond the policy side pretty quickly. Right.
Well, and so in conversations about what happened with Hectra, from your lens, what do you think, or if anything, will happen at the state level in response to that? I've heard all kinds of different things that are happening, and requests for specifying where those funds go. Obviously, AG approving the bonds, all of that. So from your vantage point, do you think there will be continued conversation during session?
Oh, without a doubt, there'll be conversations. But Andrea, where they lead, no crystal ball here, where they lead and how far does it get in the House, and does it become a bill in the Senate, and does it get some traction, and does it apply to North Texas with their toll road authority? That's all remains to be seen.
Right.
So one of my friends told me that, and he survived. I was on the board, the community college before being part of the legislature.
Right.
And I said, wow, how have you made it this many years as a HCC employee? Because it can be very political and, sort of this team in, that team out sort of world. And the comment was, I stay away from where our headquarters was, 22 Wall. I don't go there. I stay out and do my thing.
Right.
And my point to you is, when Harris County does something like that, it makes the legislature look at toll road authorities and counties in general and say, wasn't thinking about that, but now I am.
Right.
And so it casts a certain element of uncertainty into transportation planning at a time where that's the last thing we need.
Right. Well, and I appreciate that update and that viewpoint. Also talking about just, financing transportation, we can talk about, gas tax and indexing it and all of that, right? We've been through all these conversations. We know what's more politically viable versus the others. In some of our conversations, and one with Vice Chairman, Senate Transportation Committee, Kelly Hancock, really circled around the VMT conversation. And while he didn't title it that, right, it was a saying that we kind of needed to look at the overall system of how we finance transportation and tying it more to miles traveled. And so I don't know where you see that kind of coming into the conversations in session, or if it is going to have to still be a more piecemeal approach or an overhaul.
Well, and so Andrea, and you've probably looked at this well enough in detail to understand all the specifics that have to get worked out for a VMT. How do I exempt myself when I was on the toll road?
Right.
It's, and of course, and then of course we have this knee-jerk fear of big brothers looking over us and monitoring activities. But as we see more hybrids and electrics, we've got to recognize that the gas tax alone is now no longer being unfairly levied. Now, do you go to VMT boy, that's a that's a quantum leap of a jump. Or do you adjust your registration fee for electric vehicles and things like that? No, but it's a conversation that needs to be had. I mean, we're not way off, but it's one of those issues where you have do my hands on the screen, like two trend lines going slightly different slopes. In 2 years, not a big deal. In 20 years, you're going to be going, geez, we should have done something back then.
Right.
So I don't have an answer, but I'm encouraged. Kelly's a classmate of mine. He's a very respected senator, particularly when it comes to fiscal matters. And if we can just have that sort of being talked about and planned, it's really going to help us, because we have a long-term disconnect with transportation use versus transportation funding.
Right.
Agreed.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I know Mustafa had a comment about the electric car. That's something we've been focused on at TAG too, is the alternative fueled vehicle conversation. Mustafa?
Jim, like we have legislation that we proposed last cycle on the electric car. And like you, our biggest thing is that there's a consensus that something should be done, right? But we're all looking for that perfect answer. And so it just moves on to the next legislative session, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think it's, I was with Todd Hunter several years ago. He drives a Prius, which is he's Todd Hunter and the Prius. Try to understand how that works.
That doesn't fit my worldview. So.
Yeah, it was kind of just like, it picked me up and I'm sitting in the Prius going like, anyway, but I think that there's a growing consensus that that something needs to be done and we should all do it, versus wait 20 years when it gets harder. If commercial vehicles and fleets start to move on the electric circuit side, they'll have an advocacy lobby that'll prevent us from making those changes, right? It just gets harder. And so our ask of you is that will you help move this conversation and create some urgency around it? Because unlike you, who understands like the long-term ramifications of this, if we don't do this sooner, right? That this will just get, a can that just goes down the line over and over again, and gas prices are not coming up. So we're going to have the price of gasoline is coming less. A lot of the fleets are more and more using, other forms. Mm-hmm. And so this requires leadership and like pushing it through. And like you, we think we're closer to doing something rather than not doing anything, because we can always perfect it and make it better. So vehicle miles travel can happen. That doesn't mean that we can't do something in vehicle registration now, and then long-term think of that solution. We just can't put this perpetually for the perfect answer.
I think you're right, and I think that's a viable path. And no, I'm happy to work with you guys on that. I think it's something that we're going to realize we should have done it whenever we do it. We think we should have done it a couple years prior. So the important thing is to do it as soon as it's practical. And that may be this next session.
Great.
Well, thank you, Mustafa and Representative Murphy. I think too, you hear in one conversation, oh, everything's on the table. The other conversation, it's, man, choose wisely, because we're not gonna be able to get through too much this session. And so it seems like there is room for some creativity, right? There's going to have to be some creative ways that either, localities, counties, municipalities are trying to take care of themselves a little bit, to not have to be so beholden and relying on state and federal funding at a time. I mean, it's just a crunch for everybody. And so one of those ways that we look at sometimes are special districts. So I know Jim Webb with Goodman Corporation is on. Jim, did you want to ask your question?
Sure. Hey, Jim, how's it going?
Hello,
just
Jim.
wanted to ask what you thought the prognosis would be this session for the creation of new special districts throughout the state. Any potential for changes to how existing special districts operate, management districts and MUDs, and maybe the potential for legislation to be proposed, which would modify how certain special districts operate currently. So just generally curious about that whole bucket of items moving forward this session.
Yeah, I think we're going to see perhaps some movement on special districts, Jim. But given what we did a couple sessions ago, developing a template, and the governor's office was pretty comfortable with that, as was the House and Senate leadership. I don't know how far afield that's going to go in a general sense, that we're going to generally change all of them by some sort of criterion. I don't really see that occurring. Now, there may be a few where there have been problems or perceived problems needing some element of remedy. I mean, I bring up the Montrose district, and not to pick on anybody, but they had a pretty good disconnect between those who were largely funding the district and those who were essentially running the district, as being big owners funding and small owners running. And that kind of led to a revolt. And where that revolution occurred was in a petition process. And so there've been conversations about, hey, should we regulate that differently? Should we lower the threshold? Should we establish criteria for the petitions themselves that maybe would help prevent people not having their expectations managed well in that process? So I think those things will be talked about. There are people who don't want more districts established just because they see it as more government, but they are very, very local in nature. So I think there may be, pardon me, some restrictions about, the number of petitions that's needed or number of owners to consent needed. But I think the general assessment of the districts is they do their jobs well, they're locally controlled, they supplement what other governments are doing, and they are the ultimate local governance kind of thing. So I don't know if there's something specific, Jim, that you're looking to grant districts or to have them able to do that you're interested in.
Nothing specific, but we've been working particularly with an unincorporated part of Harris County through a community planning effort that it has a special district that's been created, but it does not have the authority to levy an assessment currently, and they would need a legislative change for that to occur. So I was sort of thinking ahead, if a change like that, which is pretty common sense for most, would be politically palatable, just given everything else that's going on this session. But it sounds like as long as it's sort of par for the course and follows the template that you helped put together, it should be at least considerable.
Yeah, and the other thing I would say, and this would be to any of your folks interested in seeing this occur, if you have the owner support and if you have the senator and rep, it just kind of sails through. I mean, we've seen districts formed on unincorporated land that was undivided. It might be 1,000 acres, but they wanted to do certain things with their district, and they even put it on top of a mud as well to do sort of different things. Those are sailing through, but that's because there's no owner whispering in the ear of the legislator saying, oh, this is bad, or I don't like those guys, or they have poor plans, or they're spending too much on parks, or whatever that notion is. So it's really more a matter of doing homework. But I'll also say this, I don't know all the things I'd like to know that are happening in various developments. And so if there's specific concerns people have now or later on, my office and I, we'd love to hear about them, because getting ahead of a problem really keeps it from unraveling and becoming something harder to deal with later on. So the door's open on that.
Thank you, Jim. I know Dr. Lewis is on and had a question for you about your district.
Carol, you there?
I'm here. It takes me a minute to find the microphone to unmute. It always takes a second, but I'm now unmuted. How are you to this
There you
afternoon?
go. I can see you now.
I know. Good. Great to see you. So my question is this. I-10 has been completed. Nothing else will be done with it. I'm curious as to if you're hearing things about what your constituents are now saying their transportation needs might be. I want to marry that with thinking about Gulf Coast Rail District. We did a review of West Park Corridor, and the study showed that it was appropriate for BRT. We have no money at this moment, but we want to have some money soon. So I just wanted to get a read from you about what you see as needs and where to go in the future for folks who live there. And if there are things that are sort of lying in wait, sort of unrecognized needs.
Well, I mean, I think you point out one element, which is BRT as a technology really is cost effective and is very flexible. And I think when people hear about it, it appeals to their logic a lot more than a train. I mean, there are people that will tell me that, you know, trains are going to capture a higher share of the demand than a BRT will because of the sex appeal of the train. But I think the public support for a BRT is going to be multiples of a train because it does have a lower cost. It does have greater flexibility. And so I think pursuing those kinds of projects at the federal level and asking for state support to do that is something that I would love to see. I think people are recognizing, and Carol, you bring up I-10, right, which runs right through my district, and it's not jam-packed all the time, but people are largely kind of surprised that it's as full as it was, considering how much it grew not that long ago. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that we made this massive multi-billion-dollar expansion of I-10. And so I think it's making people realize, and you see people trying to move back in. I mean, look at the growth in the inner parts of Houston. People realize that transportation can't, you know, be car dependent alone. So all alternate modes, whether it's bikes or particularly transit, are going to be looked at. And I'm excited because one of the things that we cranked into the Westheimer project that the West Chase District, one of my clients, is doing right now, is a lot of support for BRT, relocating the bus stops, building better shelters, having adequate queuing area on the platforms. All those things are going to make it a better network. So I think it's a matter of, and I think Metro with Metro Next has done a fantastic job, very responsible. So I think that it's a very bright future, particularly when you can talk about the fiscal discipline that some of these modes provide. And people want to be able to get around without having to get in their car. Driving in Houston, particularly for this next generation millennials, they're happy to take an alternate mode. In fact, they prefer it in many cases, and they're paying a lot for Uber. And if there was a transportation service that was close to as reasonable in terms of timing and location and a lot cheaper, I think it would do extremely, extremely well. So I encourage you all to keep looking at those corridor opportunities and look at those connectors in between. I mean, whether it's Gessner, whether it's Beltway 8, we need some north-south connectivity of these east-west corridors out here in West Houston.
So let me follow up by sort of picking your brain on automation and automated technologies, because that's the other piece of, I think, BRT looking forward that has the potential to be extremely exciting, is a possibility to sort of move to a more automated space. I mean, obviously, you know, Uber and Lyft and all the TNCs are thinking about that too. But that whole potential for automation, I don't know what it means in terms of legislation. We sort of think that there may be some, Texas has been pretty laissez-faire about the automation coming in, but I don't know if there's anything sort of, again, on the horizon that you might be thinking about or aware of. But again, just kind of doing a brain pick, if I could, about your thinking about these automated technologies.
Well, you know, I'll just say as a dinosaur, you know, I'm a little uncomfortable with that to some degree, but I'll also tell you generationally, the younger people are really not so concerned about it. They see it happen in other venues and they're okay with it. One thing that does occur to me is I would encourage you to go have a conversation with the people at Texas for Lawsuit Reform. I just think about liability and what that could mean. And I don't know how to, I mean, you have governmental immunity, but if you have a subcontractor or an engineer or a consultant doing that work, how are they dialed into some sort of liability here? That would concern me as a chilling element to pursuing some of these technologies. And before people are getting rich off of that industry, it'd be a good idea to consider how you might limit people's exposure in that world. And again, this is not for gross negligence. I'm not saying people should be able to do whatever they want to do, but in the normal course of business, certain things may happen that aren't anyone's, you know, particular fault, and that shouldn't be a means for someone to get rich. So.
All right, thanks.
You're welcome, Carol. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lewis. Well, the BRT was a great segue. So I know we have Tom Jason on from Metro that wants to say a little something.
Chairman, can you hear me?
I can, Tom. Hello, how are you?
Good to see you. Doing just fine. Hey, thanks for the comments. We appreciate it. But I just wanted to say thank you for what you did to help us as we were struggling with some of the issues um, regarding our ability to require masks. You helped us get clarity from the Attorney General's office with an AG opinion. Now, the governor came out shortly thereafter, but we really appreciate you helping us work our way through that. Thank you.
Well, and Tom, so first off, you're welcome on that. But let me also say, and I didn't acknowledge Metro's partnership on these improvements on Westheimer. In fact, Thursday, I'm going to go look at the bus shelter that has been developed and designed as part of that. And Metro's support for that effort has been huge and has helped make it possible. And I think people in Houston, you know, if you provide a better environment in which that transportation decision occurs and supports that transit usage, you've helped yourself out tremendously. And we're going to see that down Westheimer. And a lot of that's because of Metro's partnership on that. We really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate that. And, you know, some people don't realize today we're carrying 13,000 people a day. Well, not today, but pre-COVID, we were at 13,000 people a day on Westheimer. And we're not at 50% of that, but we're, you know, that's one of our highest demand services in the entire system. So the Westheimer route really does need attention.
Well, and until we get further down the road with addressing both the effects of COVID in terms of treatment and the prevention in terms of a vaccine, there's going to be, with good reason, some apprehension about being in close quarters with other people. And so we just have to work through that.
That, and honestly, we're preventing people from overcrowding a bus. Right now, we're trying to keep things at a maximum of 50% capacity. So
that's good. And Tom, are y'all tapping some CARES Act money for the lost revenues you've experienced during this period of time?
We have been very lucky. We've gotten significant CARES Act funding. We have spent the CARES Act funding to go through our recovery, but you know, we continue to see a decline in sales tax revenues, which is we're dependent on. But you know, we're adjusting service. We're trying to adjust expenses and trying to kind of come out the other side of this thing in a very fiscally responsible way. Not sure if there'll be an additional CARES Act, but we have certainly received some funding, and as well as others in the region. We've worked with everybody in the region to help benefit from that. So we're very, very lucky.
Good. Glad to hear it, Tom.
Thanks, Tom. So Michelle Mascoud from Dannenbaum wanted to comment on the fact that I mentioned at the beginning of these of the conversation that we usually have an average of around 50, and that you seriously have rock star status because we hit over 70 during the conversation. So he wanted to share that. And you're one of your biggest fans who's been messaging me in the chat box the whole time, and I've been trying to keep him at bay. Mr. Jack Drake has had a myriad of questions for you. So I will let him choose. He gets to have some of the closing questions. Mr. Drake?
Oh, all right. Ask about the possibilities, Jim, speaking politically here, of the D's and the R's coming together in a new and perhaps a better way in the next session toward redistricting, which my hope would be could result in more balanced districts and perhaps better human relations for people that not only serve an elective office, but for all of us who are observers and rely on you and your fellow legislators.
Well, I mean, so we have to have bipartisan support to even get the bills considered and out of the House. And so I think that'll happen. But I also want to point out, you know, when you have 25 House districts seriously in play, that's a lot of contested districts where, you know, it could go either way. So I think messy and problematic and emotional, but truly that's a indication of districts that are able to swing around. So I don't know that that's an indicator of a problem so much as the right status. And the other thing is, and you know, I'm looking at lines. I've got my marker right here, ready to draw some lines. But there are parts of Texas where you just can't find enough Republicans to form a district. There are parts of Texas you can't find enough Democrats to form a district. So you're always going to have a certain number of districts that are just kind of safe districts, just because, you know, you're going to carve 24 out of Harris County, you're going to carve 10 out of Bexar County, you're going to do 15 out of Dallas County. You know, it just sort of works out. But I will tell you, Jack, we're going to listen, and we're going to try to make sure people understand that we are going to do the best with the data we have. It may be well after session, a regular session, that we actually get to do this. It depends on when the feds deliver the data. So redistricting is going to be a challenge. It's kind of too bad, because if we're doing the budget and everything else while redistricting is occurring, everyone sort of has to be on the good behavior. But if it's two separate times, then it'll be a little more challenging. But we're going to try to make these districts representative of their communities, and then hope they can find the right people to represent them.
All right. And finally, in terms of a very serious question, are there things that we can do to help you, to support you in advancing the use of right-of-way, as in adjacent to power lines, or building additional trails and parklands, for which I'm not certain people understand, and for which you've gotten the credit you deserve for having championed and initiated, going back, how many years, Jim? 12 years or so?
Yeah, it was 3 terms, so it started in 06. Yeah. And
for those that don't know, if it had not been for Jim, we would not today have miles and anticipate additional miles of beautiful walking and bicycling trails, really throughout the Harris County area, particularly in West Chase now, that come as a result of your ability to negotiate with the state legislature and with Centerpoint, et cetera.
Well, what's funny, Jack, is, you know, that was one of those bills that took multiple sessions. And I'm telling you guys, well, you need to do things now to get ready then. That took 3 sessions to actually pass and become law. And now it's statewide. So, you know, it's rolling. I would just, you know, Harris County just adopted a big plan to make use of it. And so I think that's a good sign. This is just a classic case of making better use of the assets for the public good, to reduce the cost of these projects by giving free real estate, and Centerpoint and now other utilities being good corporate citizens to say, hey, you can use our land for virtually nothing, but just don't punish us with a bunch of lawsuits. And so I thank you, Jack, for noting that. That's been a real feather in my cap in terms of things I've achieved in the legislature that make the quality of life better for people and help our dollars, the few dollars we have for government, be better spent.
Well, terrific. Now, Jim, what's with the beard?
What's Movember, Jack? Thank you, Frank. We're about men's health, and prostate cancer is the #1 cancer, and Evelyn's prevalence is high. And so if people over 50 will get their PSA tested, this is your plug, you can get way ahead of that problem. So I'll be looking woollier as the month goes by. Maybe. I don't know. I'm not really in love with it right now, but I may have to shave. It depends what Kathleen, my wife, says. So that's where that's my real boss. So, you know.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Jack. Best of Eddie.
And to Kathleen, and to Pace, and to Robert. Oh,
boy, Jack, all the points. Good job.
Well, thank you, Jack. And thank you, Representative Murphy, for your time today. This was a great discussion. We covered a lot in just an hour. We look forward to more conversations with you. And I know that if anybody has questions, they can reach out to you at any time after today. And as we march towards session, and we don't know what it's going to look like, the advocacy is going to look like, you know, we normally have our advocacy day. We're going to be creative with it, whatever we can do. And so we look forward to talking with you and your staff and working on that as we go towards January 2021.
Well, thank you for your attention. Thanks for the invitation. And please keep up the advocacy. Y'all are filling a very important space there. So well done.
Thank you so much. Everybody take care, and we'll see everybody back again.
Thanks, Representative Murphy.
Thank you.